we're going to talk about realism, right? One of the most, or one of the mainstream theoretical perspectives in the field of international relations. And realism has been employed by a considerable number of scholars of international relations throughout the history of the field of international relations, meaning that you have to try to understand realism as fully as possible, right? So today, that is the main theme that we will address. But before we get down to that, realism, I think that there is a need for us to sort of recap some of the important points that we've learned in a previous week, right? Because I strongly doubt that you guys have learned and studied again or go over what you have learned. So let's do this at least briefly, okay? So in a previous week, okay, 2 weeks ago, this is what we learned, right? What is theory and why do we need a theory, especially when it comes to the study of international relations, right? And these are some of the questions that you actually thought about last week, in 2 weeks ago, right? And what is a theory, and how do you define theory, and how is theory understood in the field of international relations? And why do we need a theory, by the way? And what types of theory do you support? And so on and so forth. And these are the two core readings that you already read. And Sungyeon, Minhyuk, Jaeyeon gave us a fantastic presentation, I suppose, about these questions, right? What is theory and why do we need a theory? So briefly, these are the main points or key points that I want you to sort of remember, right? So the key point here is the international politics, especially today's international politics, has become complex and dynamic, right? More than ever, because of the end of Cold War, the increased level of interdependence economically and national boundaries, and because of those phenomena, national boundaries have been blurred, right? So there is an old saying that the today's world, or 21st century, of global politics is often described as an age of globalization and interdependence, right? So the point is that in order for us to understand or make sense of what's going on, or what will be, or what is likely to happen in such a complex world politics, we need a tool, right? We need a tool, or at least framework, some kind of framework, to identify or discern or single out, right, key factors of interest out of a myriad of factors and actors and newly emerging issues, right, and problems and questions. So in this sense, theory, as I explained, seems to be or could be understood in terms of simplifying, right, simplifying a complex reality with an aim to provide generalizations, right, which allows us to make predictions, right, about complex world politics or state behavior in complex global political arena. Or it could be understood in terms of the modeling a complex reality with important features, questions, actors, and issues, while ignoring other unimportant and trivial ones. So this is a generally accepted conception of what theory is and what theory can or should do in the field of international relations, right? So this is a general understanding or generally accepted understanding of what theory is. But however, as I explained previously, there are different, right? There are many different understandings of what theory is and what theory can do or should do. And theories are doing very different kinds of things. That's the key point, right? Put forward by the three authors of one of the key readings that you already read, right, for the previous seminar meeting. So there are different types of different kinds of theory in the field of international relations. For example, we have explanatory theory, which is concerned with why question or identifying the causes of state behavior or international political phenomena, right? So they are interested in generalization and prediction, right? So explanatory theories believe that theory should be generalizable with predictive capacity. And to be honest with you, that is the, again, generally accepted understanding of what theory should do in the field of international relations, including political science, okay? In the entire field of political science, we often think that theory should be able to provide us predictions based on generalization, okay? That is the general understanding of what theory is or should do, right? But again, as we understood previously, there are different kinds of theory and different aims that theory would like to achieve, right, in the field of international relations, although they remain at the margins of the field, of the discipline. So here we have critical theory, which is concerned with criticizing particular social arrangements, such as anarchic system or hierarchical system, and so on and so forth, and outcomes. And so the point of theory here in this understanding, in this particular understanding, is not to interpret or explain or predict a complex or simplify a complex reality, but to change such a complex hierarchical or anarchical international system. And also we have another type of theory, which is the normative theory, right? And this theory is interested in the moral dimensions of international politics or political life in general, right? They are interested in right or wrong questions, good and bad questions, right? And here also we have constitutive theory, right? And this theory is not interested in why, generalization, or prediction, and so on and so forth, but it is interested in how question, or what questions. For example, what a state is and how the current international norm has been established in the first place. And more importantly, in this understanding, theory can never be objective or objectively tested because they believe that theory is part of the reality. Theory constructs or constitutes what we live in, right? So therefore, we cannot objectively test theory based on empirical observations, which is although a common approach to theory test, right? Based on empirical observation, we judge whether a particular theory is right or wrong. But in this understanding, that's not a right way, right? And finally, there are a group of scholars who prefer to understand theory as a lens, right? And here, theory is often understood as a way of understanding the same international political issue or question or problem from different perspective, right? We put different color lens, then we'll see the same phenomenon or issue quite differently. So the key point, as I again to repeat, there are many different understandings of what theory is or what theory should do, right? And more importantly, no agreement among scholars, let alone among students whatsoever, regarding the question of what theory should do and what type of theory we should support, right? And that is a question actually that something that you need to decide, right? And I sort of empathize that although there is a dominant view of what theory is and what theory should do in the field of international relations, we as students of IR need to embrace a pluralistic understanding of theory, right? That is another important point that I empathize, right? We need to accept a pluralistic understanding approach pluralistic approach to understanding what theory is, because that gives us invaluable chance or opportunity to talk to each other, right? As of today, the field of international relations, the contemporary field of international relations, is sort of like has become like fragmented, okay, divided field. Okay, no one really bothers to listening to each other. You know, they just work and talk within the boundaries set by their preferred or advocated epistemological theoretical understandings, right? So in order for us to have progress in the field of international relations, dialogue or talking to each other is the key, I suppose, right? And in order for us to have a dialogue, we need to have a pluralistic attitude, right? When it comes to understanding theory or theoretical perspectives, right? So with that in mind, today we will talk one of the several or one of the many theories or theoretical perspectives that we could employ when it comes to understanding and studying international relations, and which is realism, right? That is, we will focus on today as a first, not the only, the first theoretical approach or theory in the field of international relations. So again, as I said, realism has been mostly used for theoretical study of international relations as well as foreign policy. Okay? So there could be many different and interesting questions that we could raise, we could think about, right? And these are just some of a few questions that I think you might need to consider today. For example, what is realism, and what are the core or major arguments of the balance of power theory, which is one of the representative theories under the heading of realism, right? As I said previously, realism is not a specific theory per se. Instead, it is more like a theoretical perspective that could contain a number of different, more specific theories, okay, based on the underlying assumptions shared by realist scholars, right? That balance of power theory is one of the several specific theories under the heading of realism. So, what are the major arguments? Okay. And also, security dilemma. Security dilemma is one of the key or core concepts in the realist study of international relations. So we need to understand what it means, right? What do we mean by security dilemma? And also, what kind of predictions does the realist perspective or realism or realist theory makes regarding the state's external behavior, right? So here you could sort of have a kind of sense that what type of theory that realism applies to or belongs to, right? Here the question is, what prediction does realism make for us? Meaning that realism is interested in prediction. That suggests or it follows that realism is explanatory type of theory. Precisely because realism is interested in identifying general patterns of state behavior and discerning important aspects of international relations out of the myriad of different issues and actors. You know, they mainly focus on states, in particular great powers, major powers. They are focusing on war, conflict, rather than, the trade or culture or language or identity or ideas, right? So realism here, just by a simple look at the question here, you could understand what type of realism, what type of theory the realism belongs to, right? Explanatory theory. And what are the shortcomings? This is important and interesting question. This will be, right? What type or what the shortcomings of realism has in the study of international relations. And again, today I ask you to read two core reading materials. Right? One is written by Mark Genesis, which is the sort of a general overview of what realism is, right? Quite easy to understand, right? 맞죠? 그렇지? 그다음에 the second one is written by Colin Ellman, a great scholar in my view. It's a more detailed analysis of what realism is and how realism has evolved throughout the history of the Cold War, especially, right? The evolution of realist thought. That's the key issue addressed by Colin Ellman's paper entitled Realism, right? Okay, so Sangyu Emily Dayan, 다 맞지? We'll give a presentation about these questions. So why don't you come forward and start?
Hi, everyone. Hi. We will explain about realist series and these are contents we explain about realist theories. Mhm. Yeah, hi, my name is Taihan Yu, and today I'm gonna explain about realism and other contents of realism and classical realism related to some well-known scholars and balance of power. Now, let's begin to study other contents of realism. First, realism had been placed in the core of international politics through World War II and the Cold War. More specifically, its appearance was influenced by the failure of idealism and backlash of totalitarianism that provoked the Second World War. Second is the main actor in realism is state. And third, the goals of states are enhancing the power and security. In realism, primary goals of the most states are power and security. The power usually can be reflected by the military power, and which is regarded as a key factor for understanding IR. Fourth, the realism considers human as pessimistic being. Last but not least, the realists think that international system has to be anarchic and self-help system. Next, I'm going to explain classical realism with some scholars' idea and balance of powers. Classical realism is established in post-World War II era that seeks to explain international politics as a result of human nature. The first scholar is Thucydides. He used the Peloponnesian War to explain how the war is occurred. The inevitable reason of war between Athens and Sparta is a sensation of fear which both of them felt. Sparta began to strengthen its military power in response to the vitality of Athens. The Athens grew fearful of their arms buildup and responded in a similar fashion. This event can be an explanation of security dilemma. Next scholar is Nicola Machiavelli, who suggested the view that humans are weak. And then his view has been placed in the core of the core of classical realism. He also stressed the importance of military power and security. Third scholar is Morgenthau. He thought that conflict, including war, unstable situation, and violence was driven not by political and ideological difference situation. Sorry. 죄송해요. 다시 Morgenthau 다시 설명드릴게요. The scholar is Morgenthau. He thought that conflict, including war, unstable situation, and violence was driven not by political and ideological differences as much as by human desire to dominate other humans. And he suggested that statements think and act in terms of power and states, pursue prudent goals that are based on the notion of interest defined as power. Lastly, George Kennan provides a formulation of American foreign policy and intellectual and geopolitical foundation for U.S. states post-war policy of containment, aimed at curbing Soviet expansionism. His idea relied upon the realist theories of both of power politics and balance of power. And then I'm gonna explain briefly what is balance of power and how it is occurred. It means literally that keeping power evenly to prevent war and maintain peace. Then how do the states cooperate each other and for what? If two or more states or coalition of states maintain distribution of power, neither side can be confident of victory should conflict arise. For this reason, states are reluctant to initiate or pursue a military resolution to their differences with other states to maintain the international status quo. Thank you. And next, Sang-gyu will, Emily will explain on neorealism.
Okay. Hello, I'm Emily. I'm a bit sorry at first. I went to hospital yesterday. I have big problems with my vocal cords, so I'll try to speak. I won't be able to speak too loudly, and hope you understand. So now let me explain about neorealism. So the basic difference between classical realism and neorealism is focused on the structure of international system as a whole rather than human nature. To talk about it, we should look at the nature of international system, which is anarchy. Most of you must be familiar with the term, but let me briefly explain. The word comes from Greek anarchia, which meant without a ruler. So anarchy is the system with the lack of central authority of the government to enforce law and order between states and throughout the globe. So according to de Waal, who is a founder of neo-realist theory, to understand the international system, we should focus on the anarchic system. The country's main goal is to survive, and since there is no main government, which ensures peace, state exists in a self-help system, which means that the state is responsible for its own survival and cannot rely on the help from other states. There are three dimensions in international structure. First is the order between units, in this case countries, which is anarchy. The second dimension is the functions of the unit, which is seeking survival, and this is similar or same for each state. And the third dimension is the ability of units, which means distribution of power, and that is each different, right? So the difference between ability of each unit, the distribution of power, describes the characteristics of international structure. So the characteristics of the international structure by the distribution of power explains and predicts the action of states in the international politics. Here comes the importance of balance of power, which is needed for the stable international order. However, unlike in classical realism, neo-realists like Walt believe that bipolar system is more stable than unipolar and multipolar systems. Now let's take a look at the security dilemma, which is result of a self-help system. When states feel insecurity and lack of trust among states in the anarchic system, they start to arm themselves for self-preservation. But if one state starts to arm themselves, even for defensive purposes, it makes other states in the system feel less secure, and as a consequence, make them arm themselves as well. That may lead to expensive and wasteful arms race and even lead to war. Okay, and now let's take a look at the structural realism, and let me first talk about the defensive structural realism. Like neo-realism, it suggests that states look for security in an anarchic system. However, there are three main differences between these two theories. First, defensive structural realism relies mostly on the rational choice of the state. Secondly, the offense-defense balance also matters in the system. And thirdly, and the most important, I think, is that defensive structural realists predict that states want to keep their status quo. Defensive structural realists then suggest that states should seek appropriate amount of power, not more. Seeking superior power is not rational response to external systemic pressures. And then the offensive structural realism, unlike defensive structural realism, who believe that state seeks appropriate amount of power, offensive structural realists claim that for security, the state needs as much power relative to other states as possible. Now, let me give the mic to.
Hi, I'm Sang-gyu, and I'll briefly explain the last example of our the realist theory that we are dealing with through our presentation, the rise and fall realism, which views the rules and practices of the international system as being determined by the wishes of the leading or the most powerful nation, which means since the considerable benefit accrues to the leader, other great powers seek this pole position and attempt to obtain such position, and thus international interactions or conflicts occur as a result. This particular theory explains how states rise to and then fall from this leading position. Also, through these changes, how the consequences of such trajectory affects each state's foreign policy. And the micro foundation that explains this phenomena is suggested to be the rational choice. Given a narrowing of the gap between the most and secondly powerful nations, the hegemon will calculate the need for prevention or action, and if this attempt fails, the challenging state will opt for a war to displace this hegemony. Yes. No, go back. The best known work regarding this theory is the one by Robert Gilpin, which is in the core reading for today's class, The War and Change in World Politics. Gilpin suggests that the state determines the necessity of conflict, whether the benefits of doing so exceed its cost or not. And Organski's power transition theory also argues that the differential... no, go to the next page. Sorry. And Organski's power transition theory also argues that the differential rates of each nation's growth cause wars over system leadership. To restate this, when states that are dissatisfied with the current status quo gain the hegemonic power, war is likely to take place. Hence, peace is most likely to be achieved when current system leaders maintain a substantial lead over other states. Yeah, this was the one for next page. Okay. Now the last part of our presentation, the critique of the theory on the basis of many scholarly remarks regarding the subject matter from the core reading. As we have constantly emphasized throughout our presentation, realism offers important and unique insights into the essential characteristics of international relations. However, like any other theories, realism has both strengths and weakness. From practical standpoint, realist theory offers a set of simple and straightforward principles that have guided political leaders in their decision-making. These pragmatic guidelines strip away moral and idealistic notions of how states should act or how international dialogue is to be conducted. Rather, the focus is on how nations do actually behave within the international system, both individually and collectively. Realism also has some valid strengths from a historical and scholarly standpoint. And realists contend that history tends to favor their approach to international relations theory. For instance, conflict between Athens and Sparta, as previously explained by Taeyeon, and Cold War and even the US war with Iraq in 2003 all serve as case studies and provide data to support an argument for realism. On the other hand, liberal theorists argue that realism places too much emphasis on conflict while neglecting the role of international institutions. in promoting cooperation. The nature of international competition has changed nowadays, and war is no longer considered a natural extension of politics among major powers. With the rise, and also with the rise of nuclear weapons, making the pursuit of power using war or armed conflict, it is made dangerous and costly. It is fairly safe to assume that war between two nuclear powers would be unwinnable for both sides. Thus, the realist claim can be considered to be insufficient in some certain viewpoints. Further, the international conditions that allow for and even promoting cooperation between nations challenge the neo-realist notion of anarchy. Certain generally accepted rules and norms, as well as the institutions that establish and uphold them, play an important role in facilitating and promoting an appropriate climate for cooperation. Anarchy, even anarchy driven by a certain power structure, does not offer an abundant explanation for the kind of cooperation and transnational linkages so common in our contemporary world. In addition to these weaknesses, the fact that states are no longer the sole important actors on the international stage still remains. International organizations such as the UN and non-governmental organizations such as multinational corporations and environmental organizations perform important functions in maintaining stability and expanding cooperation throughout the world. Another problem of realist theories is the increasing relevance of sub-state actors such as terrorists. Unlike the assertion of realists that the states are the primary actors in the international criteria and that all the other actors are considered to be less important, the events such as 9/11 depicts the significant security threat posed by non-state actors. Furthermore, we must raise a question in realist sense. Are the states truly unitary actors in today's complex global conditions? Can a nation be viewed monolithically, able to make coherent decisions based strictly on a nation's interest? The politics of a state are comprised by compromises between competing interests. Thus, as the realist suggests, that a nation's act reflect rational, consistent cost-benefit calculations based on purely on self-interest is difficult to be proven. Last but not least, sorry it was long, the realist theory is not capable of accounting peaceful changes. Realists insist that changes in international system can only come about from and is often catalyst for war. However, phenomenon of peaceful change, such as the wake of Cold War or peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Union, prove their statements as wrong. There are also some ramifications suggested by the Colin Ellman in the text, and you guys might want to consider those ramifications when discussing or debating individually. In conclusion, to provide you with some insights for the future of realist theory, as the 21st century began, the society has become more free, and by growth through cooperation, the conflicts are being resolved by peaceful means. Therefore, without some sort of modifications, proponents of realist theory may no longer be applied in explaining the flow of international relations. Thank you. And if you guys have questions, feel free to ask. Sorry it was so long. It was like almost 20 minutes. Any questions? Yes, Mio. ethnic. So what you are suggesting is that terrorists can also be considered as a nation or state, for instance, like Islamic State. But I don't know how to answer this question because the Colin Ellman stated that the terrorists are sub-state actors in the international society. So I think that is a valid point, but as we've prepared the presentation according to the core reading, so yeah, I think that makes some sense. We're, well, well, I think is really valid, but let's ask.
질문 한 번만 다시 해주세요. 네, 한국어로 해주세요. 네.
비국가적 행위자라고 지금 표현하는데 주요 국가 행위자가 아니라 사람인데 어떻게 보면은 테러를 하는 사람들의 테러 목적 자체가 특정 국가로부터의 독립 혹은 이제 특정 민족들이 자신들만의 국가의 건설을 위해서 이제 테러를 하는 게 대부분이잖아요. 9.11도 있고.
그렇죠.
그렇다면은 어떻게 보면 그들도 자신이 꿈꾸는 국가라는 그거에 대한 목적을 위해서 테러를 행하는 거기 때문에 국가 행위자로 볼 수 있지 않는가라고 그냥 의견을 던져본 거예요. 어떻게 생각하시는지.
Can I tell some answer in Korea? 한국어로 말해도 돼요? 제 생각, 저는 PPT를 만든 사람으로서 상규 오빠가 그냥 준 자료를 그대로 사용한 것 뿐이고요. 하지만 제 생각에는 비행위자라고 테러리스트를 칭하는 게 맞다고 생각합니다. 왜냐하면 국가를 건설하고 자기의 어떤 이상적 그런 세계관을 가진 국가를 건설하기 위해서는 충분히 그에 마땅한 합법적이고 정당한 방법을 통해서 이루어져야 하기 때문에 네, 이들은 그렇지 않잖아요. 폭력을 가하고 테러를 가하고 하기 때문에
Emily has provided the answer. Well, in strictly realistic perspective, I think soft power doesn't actually like be counted as physical power of a state, because the most important thing of realist theories, realist tradition, the conflict between nations and power policy between countries incurs the interactions between states. So I think soft power can be considered to have like strong influences nowadays, but in realist theories, I don't think it's that influential. Here you go.
When you think about the time of peace and the time of war, right? When you have the time of peace, okay, the soft power may matter, but when it comes to war, what do you have from the soft power? It doesn't play a role at all. And I mean, in this theory, it is more or less about like the balance of power and the conflict, right? The solving conflicts and like kind of trying to keeping the peace between
Well,
some
actually, I think in times of war, soft power can also like take part in the process, because like in propaganda and stuff, you can like. No? Okay then. Any other questions? Mm. Yeah. Mm. Yes, I do. I do think like that because we mainly focused on the concepts that were actually in the core reading, so we couldn't actually like consider those ideas. But I think it can also be one of the shortcomings of realist theory, I guess. Yes, and any other questions? Well, should I give the mic to the professor then? 네.
수고했고 아마 지금 뭐 다현이지? 다현, 에밀리, 상규 just gave us a presentation about realism. Realism, 맞죠? Okay. And Taehyun sort of gave us a general explanation or overview of classical realism. Taehyun, 그치? And then followed by Emily's presentation about neo-realism, also known as structural realism, simply because it places its emphasis on structure of international system, which is often called as anarchy, right? Anarchic system. And then finally, Sangyu provides us with sort of a concluding remarks regarding, with respect to the shortcomings as well as the strength of realist theory of international relations. And I believe that this is a well summarized presentation to some extent. However, the presentation is short of providing or offering us, you guys, your own perspectives or opinions about, for example, the shortcomings of realism, or actually, before I let you deliver your presentation today, I had to explain how I'm going to assess your presentation. I forgot. Very sorry about that. I forgot that I had to explain this, but now I will. 알겠지? Assessment criteria for your oral presentation. First, total point, 10 points. Okay, the highest point will be 10 points, and we have 5 categories, and each point per each category. Okay, first time, that's very obvious, and your presentation should not be more than 30-minute time period. All right. No. Doesn't include. Okay. Good point. Very, very good point. Okay, I respect that. Time, okay, less than 30 minutes. All right, it's easy peasy. Because just they deliver like a less than 25 presentation, right? The second is a summary, and for that, in that category, I just said your presentation, today's presentation is quite okay, quite well done, right? So in this category, you should demonstrate your ability to provide a good general overview of the issue or theme or topic or questions that you're going to deal with from the readings. Okay. The third category will be critical understanding, which is very, very important in my view. Okay, when it comes to assessment, critical understanding, you should be able to demonstrate your ability to critically engage with the core readings, the core arguments, core questions made by the authors of the core readings that you will read and address. Okay, you need to provide your own thoughts and perspectives on the arguments or the theory you will discuss and explain to us. Right. The fourth category is contextualization. In this category, you should be able to demonstrate your ability to apply the key concept, for example, balance of power or security dilemma or arguments. Realism is generally pessimistic about international politics. It is all about war, power, material power, and great states, whatever. And theories of the core reading to real-world problems, real-world issues. Okay, so you better provide us with some concrete examples that you think might be useful for us to understand what you are talking about or what your thoughts, opinions, right? Concrete examples or or cases, okay, empirical cases. And final category will be presentation skills as a team, okay, as a team, not individual presentation skill, but as a team. Okay, that's very important. So these five, all right. So among these five categories, I will give you 2 points for category number 2. To 상규, 누구죠? 다현, Emily. And time, of course, 2 points. Critical understanding, 1 point. Okay. Contextualization, 0.5. Okay. Yes, 0.5. Presentation skills, 1.5. 오케이지? 그러면 얼마인지 알겠죠? 처음이기 때문에 이렇게. So keep that in mind. These how I'm gonna assess your presentation, oral presentation. Okay. 근데 이번에는 이거를 내가 하지 않았기 때문에 지금 이렇게 한다는 거고, 상규, 에밀리, 다현은 다르게 내가 평가를 하겠어요. Lucky you. 알겠지? 다음 너네들도 그 다음부터는 이제 오케이?
All five categories are marked out of 2, right?
Yes.
The full mark is 2 for each category.
Yes. Therefore 10. The highest point will be 10. Okay. 그래서 오늘 상규, 에밀리, 다현, well done, but sort of lacking your own perspective and thought. All right. And I believe that you gotta do some more practice before you deliver your presentation. Just like 성현, 우성현, 2 weeks ago, I was impressed by Songhyun's presentation and his prep for his part of a presentation. Okay. So anyway, overall, very entertaining, 상규, very entertaining and fun. 잘했어. Let's have a 10-minute break, and we will have after that we will have a discussion, group discussion. Is everybody in the classroom, right? 아까 얘기했듯이 우리 그 다현이랑 상규랑 에밀리가 사실 잘했어요. 이게 쉽지 않지. I do know that it could be quite scary experience when you try to deliver your presentation in front of these many students, especially in a non-native language. Yeah, that's good. Kiki, thank you for helping me out here. Okay. Anyway, but that's why I told you that you have to, or you at least you need to try to do some practice before you deliver your presentation, and practice makes your deliver skills, delivering skill, whatever, and English skill improve, right? Anyway, well done. Okay, like I said before, let's do a discussion. And Sangyu, by the way, why didn't you guys come up your own questions for this class?
We prepared the things containing the ramifications that Elman mentioned in the core reading, but
That's the question proposed by Colin Elman, not yours, right?
yeah, we kind of
뭔 kind of야?
we thought the limit for the presentation
I
was 20
see.
minutes, so we thought
I want to have very fresh ideas and perspectives from you students, you young students. 얼마나 너네들이 이렇게 프레시한 아이디어를 갖고 있겠니? 나처럼 올드한 사람들은 이미 다 책에 있는 거 다 알잖아. 그러니까 너네들이 어떤 그런 fresh and new perspective. That's what I expect, okay, from you, okay? Very fresh, even provocative, right? Approaches and thinking regarding the conventional approach, okay? Even if someone said this is right, this is wrong, right? Even if a professor says something like this, do not believe, right? That's just the his or her perspective and opinion, right? You have to have your own stance, okay? When it comes to, at least when it comes to the study of political science or politics and society, right? We are not talking about natural world or natural sciences. We are talking about social and political science. Hence, you need to have your own thought and stance. Okay, good. Right, these are the 4 questions that I actually personally prepared for today's seminar meeting for you. Okay, so first question is quite obvious one, right? And this is a question already appeared in the course syllabus, right? What are the key arguments and assumptions for realism, or what are the key predictions that realist theory makes for us with respect to international relations and particularly state foreign policy behavior, right? What kind of prediction and arguments do they make, realist scholars make? And do you agree with them? Do you agree on the key arguments, assumptions, and predictions of realist theory? And second question is this, and I'm pretty sure by now you are already fully aware of the main differences between classical realism and neorealism. So just go over and do it quickly, this question. And a related question is this. Classical realism and neorealism could be, roughly speaking, summarized in terms of the following points or analogy. Okay, human nature versus anarchy. Okay, in terms of the relative influence regarding state foreign policy behavior. All right, classical realism emphasizes human nature, whereas neorealism emphasizes the structural influence, right, of the international system. So, in your opinion, in your view, which between them is more influential in affecting states' foreign and security policy and their behavior? Right? And third question is this, okay? Think about concrete examples or cases that realism can explain very well, and cases and examples that realism cannot explain well or finds it difficult to understand and explain. Give us an appropriate explanation about it. And the final question is the strengths and shortcomings of realist theory. Right? Although the main text core readings states this and this and that, right? But think further than the already provided answers, right? That you can find in the text. Okay, more strengths and shortcomings of realism or realist theory. And when you think about question number 4, you might want to think about different types of theory here, right? Because in the core reading, especially the one written by Colin Ehrman, he doesn't state a thing about different types of theory and the shortcomings of realism in the context of different types of theory, in the context of the fact that there are different types of theory, right? In his mind, theory is understood solely in terms of explanatory type. Okay? So in that perspective, you could think about more shortcomings, or probably strengths as well, about realism in the context of different types of theory we are talking about in the field of international relations. The first question was, what are the key arguments and assumptions of realism or realist theory? 뭘까요? 사실 it seems to me that you spent too much time in whether you support or agree realism or not, right? But obviously, before you got into that, you needed to lay out key assumptions, arguments of realism. Okay, 뭘까요? What are the key arguments? Okay, let's go for the first one. Key arguments of realism. 누가 얘기해 볼까? Who would like to give us an answer? And that will be a very interesting topic for us to talk about. And there will be a time, probably in week 9, right? When we 맞죠? 미국에 대해서가 아니고 week 7, week 8, when we try to apply the theories that we will learn up until week 7, then we will try to apply them to the real world issue, including the United States and the relationship between China and the United States, and see them whether their arguments and predictions are correct. Okay, so At that time, we will talk again, pick that up again. Okay. And what I was going to tell you was that there was another, probably third, adding to Minhyuk and Hedges' point, perspective associated with realism, associated with the issue of refugee or immigrant crisis going on in Europe from the perspective of realism. As I said before, in this group, realism probably, I mean, let me emphasize, hardcore realists. Okay, hardcore realists do not care at all, right? They don't care at all about the immigrants or immigration or refugee. You know why? Because immigration or refugee do not threaten the very existence of state. That is what they probably would respond to Minhyuk or Hedges. Okay, immigrants or immigration does not matter, or matter. It matters, but it does not threaten the very existence of the territory or the sovereignty, right? So they simply do not talk about migration or immigrant crisis. I mean, it is very difficult even for scholars like me to find what they think. I mean, what realists think about immigrant crisis. Most of the discussion regarding immigrant crisis is made from liberalist perspective, or, like I said, normative, right? The theoretical perspective of normative theory. There are different types of theory, as I explained before, right? But most of the discussion regarding immigration or immigrant crisis are from normative perspective, right? Because they are simply interested in right or wrong, good and bad questions, okay? But here, as an explanatory theory, realism doesn't really care about the moral dimension, such as refugee issues in the international politics. What they care is the power, material capability, and strong states. I mean, there are different kinds of state, as you know. There are small state, there are medium-sized state, but they are only interested in great major powers such as United States, China, Russia, Germany, France, and so on and so forth. Okay. So that might be a shortcoming of realism, I suppose, right? Okay. Before I let you go, let me give you a very short review of realism and key points that you might want to consider. Okay, key points. Realism. 뭐 적을 필요는 없지만. Was, as I said, was a dominant theoretical tradition, as all of you know, right, in the period of Cold War, and it is still one of the major theories in the study of international relations, and that's the one big key argument of realism. Okay, realism describes international affairs as a struggle for power among self-interested states. That is one of the key arguments. Okay, the first question we talked about and thought about was what are the key arguments of realism? Realism describes international affairs as a struggle for power among self-interested states, and that's the key punch, right, from the realist perspective. So realism is generally pessimistic about the prospects for eliminating conflict and war. Rather, conflict and war are considered as persistent and pervasive features of international politics. It is almost impossible for international actors, specifically states, to avoid conflictual situations in the international system. Okay? So realist scholars are very pessimistic about international politics in general, right? So that's the key question, right? That's the key question. Then we have to ask ourselves, right, why? Okay, like I said, realism believes that it is impossible for us to avoid war and conflict, right? War and conflict has become sort of like a norm right? They are very pessimistic about international affairs. Then the question becomes why? Why do they think like that, right? And there are two different ways of thinking in this matter, right? First, classical realism. Okay, we have classical realism, and then we have neo or structural realism. Both of them have very different answers to the why question that I just raised. Okay, why do they think? Why international relations is deemed to be pessimistic? Okay, classical realism. Classical realists such as Hans Morgenthau believe that states, like human beings, had an innate desire to dominate others, and this will eventually lead us humans to fight, right? Because we want to dominate. I want to dominate you, and you want to dominate me. Then the end result will be a war and conflict, right? There is no compromise between them whatsoever. So according to classical realism, more specifically speaking, because the desire for more power, desire to dominate others is rooted, is planted, okay, in the flawed nature of humanity, human beings. So humans, and by extension states, right, continuously, inevitably engage in a struggle to increase their capability to survive, right? Because you want to dominate me, and I want to dominate you. And in order for me to survive in this struggle for power, I have to be strong. I have to increase my power, right? To survive, to protect myself. So Thomas Hobbes once famously said, the natural state of mankind in his book, Leviathan, a war of all against all. 많이 들어봤죠? 그죠? 만인에 의한 만인의. So we human, like humans, are self-interested being, and we have innate desire for more power, dominate others. So according to Thomas Hobbes, therefore we need a strong central authority to avoid the evil of discord and civil war. But the fact is, in international relations, there is no strong central authority or government. There is no world government which has a strong central authority to govern nation states, right? Since the 17th century, international politics has become an arena played and influenced by sovereign nation states, right? So there is no higher authority, there is no hierarchy in international affairs. Each one of nation states does have individual independent sovereignty, okay? So because there is no strong central authority in international politics, and because humans are self-interested, because humans have innate desire to dominate others, war and fight and conflict are inevitable, right? That's the logic, right? That is the flow of logic that we could come to our conclusion that international politics are full of conflicts. Therefore, we have to remain very pessimistic about the eliminating war and conflict. So you can see the logic there, right? 그치? 역시. 너무 아주 좋았어, 성현. So for classical realists, international politics may be described or characterized as evil. So bad things happen in international politics or foreign policy because people making foreign policy sometimes bad and evil and selfish. Right? So here you can see they do not turn their attention or pay their attention to the international system or state-to-state relationship. Rather, they pay their attention to human beings, right? And the nature underlying humanity. So in short, in sum, classical realism explains why war occur, or why should we remain pessimistic about international affairs by pointing out that the conflictual human failings, by pointing out the human failings, the wars are explained by particular aggressive statesmen. Okay? So people who are making foreign policy are very evil, selfish, and want to fight, want to dominate. Therefore, we have war. By contrast, neorealism has very, very different story, and which I will pick it up next week. Okay? Next week. 여기까지 하고, I'm gonna wrap up today's class seminar. And before I let you go, because of that we have run out of time already, Before I let you go, there is one announcement. There will be no class next week because of the Korean holiday, national holiday, Thanksgiving holiday. So I'm sure you are very happy about that. Okay. And as I have announced, there will be a makeup class. Okay. 다 알고 있죠? Makeup class in the midterm exam period. Okay. Initially, there will be no class in the midterm exam, but we will have a midterm. We will have a makeup class in the midterm exam period. And in 2 weeks' time, we will talk about liberalism in the field of international relations. And liberalism has become sort of like the alternative perspective, okay? A perspective alternative to realism, so which has very different and distinctive set of assumptions and arguments as compared with realism, okay?